This is Transistor.fm.
On the show today is one of the best bootstrappers in the business. Paul Farnell of Litmus.com joins me and shares some of his great stories. Stay tuned. If you have a web development team or a product team, you probably want to know where you're wasting time and how you can be more efficient. This is exactly what my friends at Sprintly do. They help surface the things that are slowing down development so you can focus on shipping more stuff faster. You and your team can try Sprintly for free by going to www.sprint.ly. Be sure to thank them on Twitter at Sprintly. Also, stay tuned for some shout-outs at the end of this episode. Let's get to our interview with Paul Farnell. Hi, I'm Justin, and this is Product People, the podcast focused on great products and the people who make them. Today, Kyle is away, but I'm happy to have a great guest. Paul Farnell from Litmus is here on the program. Hey, Paul, welcome to the show.
Hi, Justin. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you. I've been a customer of Litmus for a long time, so it's fun to finally get to talk to you.
Yeah, no, you too, Justin. Yeah, I mean, we go back quite a number of years now, I think.
Yeah. So let's start by quickly describing your product. What is Litmus, and what does it do?
Sure. Yeah. So Litmus is a tool for email marketers, and what we do is we help people preview their email messages before they send them out. So that is to say, letting you make sure that your emails are going to look great across, on an iPhone, on Gmail, on Outlook, on Hotmail, all the different places that somebody might read that message, and design-wise make sure that looks great. And then the follow-on part to that is tracking how successful the campaign is. So we have an analytics tool which will let you see how long people have read a message for. Did they forward it on, or they just delete it? How successful was this campaign after you sent it out? But everything we do is around helping people design and send better, more effective campaigns, basically.
Perfect. And we're going to circle back to the product in a second. But let's start with your story. Where did you grow up? When did you get into computers? What were you doing before Litmus?
Yeah, okay. So as you can probably tell, I'm British. I grew up in a town called Milton Keynes, which is just north of London, about half an hour outside of London. And I suppose my first experience with computers was through my dad, who started his own publishing company when I was fairly young, and so he was publishing a magazine. And so it was, I guess through him that I first got an Amiga. That was my first machine of my own.
Wow. What a great machine to have as your first computer.
Yeah, no, it was great. Yeah. Well, my parents were, I think this is kind of interesting. My parents were very keen. Like a lot of my friends got games consoles. Mm-hmm. My parents didn't want me to have a games console. They wanted something that I could actually kind of create things on, I guess, was the idea. And I very much did. I suppose, it's maybe it sounds silly, but I'm definitely inspired by my dad publishing this magazine. I started publishing a magazine myself and selling it at my middle school, a magazine where we did music reviews and stuff like this. And,
no way.
And started selling annual subscriptions to that as well.
You're kidding me.
Yeah, so it was kind of fun.
Annual subscriptions to your friends in middle school?
Yes, yeah, friends and teachers, because teachers had more money, of course. So they were better sales prospects. But so that was fun. So that was my sort of first introduction was that, and kind of seeing my dad lay out magazines on. It was Adobe PageMaker, or Aldus, it was called at the time, I think. Right?
Wow.
Before they got bought. Anyway, so that was fun.
Do you remember what was an annual subscription for your magazine?
Yeah, I think we did. I think it was £1. I think it cost £1 because I think each issue was 10p, And so a year was £1, and we tried to do one a month. But if you subscribe for a year, you also got a cassette tape that we had made. It was me and a friend of mine. You got this cassette tape that was only available to annual subscribers. You couldn't get this if you just bought it on a monthly basis.
Wow!
But you got this cassette tape, which was special edition, or somehow exclusive, just to these annual subscribers.
Now, how did you have a sense to do all this? Was this you watching your dad and just kind of replicating the business model you saw him pursuing?
I mean, yeah, very much so. Yeah, I mean, definitely, entirely inspired by him with that, and his advice. And we would do like a free gift with a magazine, like you get a pen or something silly like that. I mean, it's all obviously on a very, very small scale.
Yeah.
But it was kind of fun. We would enlist other friends would offer to photocopy issues for us and stuff like this, so we didn't have to pay as much for printing. We kind of pulled in some favors that way to get it free. But yeah, I mean, we made a bit of money off it, enough to kind of buy some sweets and stuff,
Yeah.
on a very small scale.
Well, I'm actually really interested in this because I'm a dad and I have kids, and I often think about how could I encourage them to be, creative, but also to get some experience like that, like to learn some business, to learn how to sell something, to learn how to build something and then put it out there. Was there something that your dad did specifically to encourage that, or was this just you watching him and emulating what he was doing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I suppose I'm not sure. I mean, there may have been things that my parents did to encourage that I don't kind of remember, or that went over my head at the time, right? Because I maybe didn't notice.
That's right.
But I mean, certainly I know that it was a very conscious choice to buy this Amiga and not a games console, because I did, I think, originally want a games console. I guess it was like a Sega Mega Drive or something.
Yeah.
And got the Amiga, which obviously you could run games on, and I would play games on there. But the key part of that for my parents was that it had these kind of, painting tools and all this kind of thing that we could, I could do sort of creative things on. Which I guess these days, obviously, you have an iPad or something like that as a kid, then you can do way more than I was able to do then. But
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, let's fast forward. Did you continue having an interest in computers as you grew up, and is that what you ended up going to school for?
I did continue having an interest in computers, and kind of began programming. And this is probably a really familiar story, but messing around with like batch files and DOS and QBasic and stuff like that, and then eventually Visual Basic after that, and built some software products that I sold online. And again, I guess, with my dad's sort of guidance on how to sort of package those and how to write the copy for the sites that sold them, and how to set up, affiliate relationships with other partners and stuff who would promote these tools that I was building.
Okay.
So I had this little business that was called Peanut Software.
Peanut Software.
I had 2 or 3 different products. One was... it was called Instant Theme Creator, and this is back in the days when you could build. Actually, I don't use Windows anymore, so maybe you still can. But build desktop themes, which are like packages of sounds and icons and cursors and stuff. And so you might get like a Simpsons theme or something, and you could install that, and your wallpaper would be Simpsons, and your cursor would be Homer or something. This tool allowed you to put together these theme files, which, I mean, behind the scenes was very simple. But yeah, so it was a tool, I suppose, for people that were creative themselves, and wanted to
and
their own.
How old were you when you did this, and what did it sell for?
Yeah, I would have been like 12, 13, I suppose, 14, that kind of time. And what did it sell for? It was $19, the Instant Theme Creator, and I think it was always advertised as $29, but it was on sale for $19 permanently.
Wow! And did you have a website for this? Were you marketing this on bulletin boards? How was it marketed? The marketing was kind of interesting. I mean, I did actually spend a lot of time marketing this online, this tool in particular.
Yeah, there's a website, peanutsoftware.com, which I don't think is still there, but I'm sure it's there on like archive.org. Yeah, it was for sale through Reg Now, which would kind of take the payment for you and give you a license key or something like that. It was listed on download.com, which at the time was definitely like the place to advertise shareware and stuff.
That's right.
And also I had a deal with a guy who ran a site called Theme World, which was like kind of the place to get desktop themes. And so people were going there to download free themes, and we struck a deal. I forget what he got, what percentage he got, but he got some percentage of each sale of Instant Theme Creator, and a lot of the sales I got actually came via that relationship with Theme World.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So these are all the building blocks for the future, really. I mean, figuring out marketing, figuring out which channel is converting the best.
Mm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it was it was a lot of fun actually, and actually, I mean, Instant Theme Creator, and then there was a couple other versions of it after that. Actually made a reasonable amount of money, at least at the time. Making a few $100s a month or something like that, which when you're 12, 13, was quite a bit to have. So I never had like a lot of friends of mine, would do. I'm trying to think what we would have done as jobs back then. Maybe helped in a shop on a weekend or done a paper round or something like that.
Yeah.
Where it was my first job, as it were, was selling this software online.
Yeah. Was there any other notable products from that time that you can remember releasing?
Well, there was another version, or a couple other versions of Theme Creator after that, and there was another one called Instant Newsgroup Creator, or maybe just Newsgroup Creator, I forget. Obviously, Newsgroups are still around, and I don't know if this is still the case. It probably is, but there was like a process you had to go through to create an alt newsgroup, and for it to be kind of picked up by the different news servers and stuff.
You're talking about Usenet groups.
Sorry, Usenet groups, yes. Yeah. And so if you wanted to create your own, it was a little bit of a convoluted process.
That's right.
So this piece of software would take you through, like, okay, you need to send this format of email to this address and fill out, it took you through, I mean, it was really just a series of forms. But, fill out these details about your group and what it's going to be about and all this kind of thing. And then it would submit that to the right place in the right format. And then you would get a response. And then you would do the next stage. I forget exactly how it worked, but that was much less popular. It definitely sold some copies. So I don't know if there was really anything else that did that. But I think probably the people that were, creating their own Usenet groups didn't necessarily need to buy a piece of shareware to format an email, revel in that process. So,
but that's still interesting. What's interesting about that, Paul, is like a lot of us, and I mean, Usenet groups and this kind of whole world, there's a certain generation of our listeners that might not remember that. But I think what we can all identify with is, as we were growing up and got into computers, a lot of us would figure out how to do things. So we'd figure out how to hack out a theme for Windows. We'd figure out how to, the steps we needed to do to walk through creating a Usenet news group, right? But the step that I didn't take when I was a kid is what you did, which was you said, I could actually make this easier for someone else and sell this as a product. And so where did that come from? Like, did you just always just have that sense of, man, making an alt Usenet group is a pain in the butt. I should create something that makes it easier for other people to do that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know really. I suppose I did. Yeah. I think I really liked that validation of somebody paying for something. I found that very valid. I still do. That I made something worthwhile if somebody else finds it useful enough to pay for it. Whether that's a magazine in middle school, whether that's a piece of shareware or now a monthly subscription to something like Litmus. For me, it was such an important step. I didn't just want to make a magazine and distribute it around school. That would have been less than half as satisfying as making a magazine that was good enough that people would actually pay to read, or even, pay for a year up front to read because they thought one issue was good enough. Do you know what I mean? And so that was, I think, a very big, important point for me was that that validation through people, spending money on it.
Yeah, and this is really interesting to me because I wonder, like, my experience growing up was that I would figure out how to hack around things, and then but instead of creating products, I would be, I was the 12-year-old kid that got hired to network a whole computer lab or something like that, and a very different experience. And I wonder how much of maybe just because your dad was kind of building a product, which was a magazine, and then, having to sell subscriptions, you had a model there that where you could see that, you can do things that people will pay for, especially if they're good. And instead of just trading hours for dollars.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. I wonder if I hadn't had that kind of role model of somebody selling a product and instead had been a consultant of some kind, maybe I would have thought more about it in terms of doing freelance work.
Mm-hmm. And maybe the encouragement for us now is because I think, like a lot of things, a lot of this is about practice and having that mindset. And so a lot of times, let's go back to the Usenet group example. Like I said, I created an alt Usenet group when I was a kid, and I never thought, this could be valuable for me to, sell this as something that someone else could, make it a product and make it easier to do this. And even now, I wonder if there's a lot of things that technical people, like the people listening to the show, there's so many things that they do on a daily basis, or there's things that they've learned, or there's kind of hacks that they've done that could probably be turned into great products. But they have to think about it that way. In a lot of ways, Litmus is like that, like you could have, we'll talk about Litmus a little later, but you could have, you could have just, put a bunch of old computers in your room and done the testing for consulting work to test all the clients. But then you went one step further and said, if this is valuable for me, it might be valuable for someone else. Yes.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's very true. Yeah. And there's that scalability of, I think that's what's exciting about web-based products, isn't it? Is that it's, in comparison to, say, consulting and having done both, the exciting part of a web product is that scalability and that, the marginal cost of another customer being so small.
Yeah. Okay, well let's get back to your story. Was there any other kind of notable products that you built as you were growing up?
That's a good question. I mean, honestly, from after the theme creator stuff, I worked on a. I don't want to take credit here where I don't deserve it, but I did work a bit on. This makes sense. On a product that was called Simple Image Editor, and it was actually my current co-founder's product, Simple Image Editor, or it was him that coded it. But it was built out of a need that one of my clients had, because I was doing some freelance web design work at the time, and I built this little kind of CMS. I expect most of the people listening to this may have built some kind of CMS for a client at one point or another. And one of the things that they had to do is, okay, all your images on this, listing here need to be 50 pixels wide or whatever. And they didn't know how to Photoshop and stuff. So they had a need to edit images. So we'd given them this CMS, and this was a pain point for them. And kind of born out of that was Matt building this Simple Image Editor, which he went on to sell, that we sold as part of the CMS to the client, but also then he went on to sell, as shareware to other people as well. Kind of made it a little bit more generic, so you could do any size images or whatever. So that was something that I didn't build myself, but kind of worked on the kind of specking out. But I think following on from that, I mean, by this point, so I went to college not for computer science but for business,
Okay.
In Manchester. I went to Manchester Met.
And why did you choose business?
I suppose that was just where my interest was. I think I had always thought I would do business and not computer science. I mean, honestly, I don't know if I'd have got into a computer science course. None of the things that I built were particularly well built.
Yeah.
You know, the copy on the site was really well written, I think, and they sold well. But behind the scenes, like the actual, the Visual Basic or the Delphi code in there was not that great at all. Whereas, by contrast, one of my co-founders, Matt, did take computer science and just has this natural aptitude for that kind of thing. So I don't know. I think I felt business was just a better fit for my skills, really, or where my interest was. I didn't feel like I was ever going to be like an amazing computer programmer.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt like I'd had some success on the kind of business side of things. And
yeah.
So that's what I could
Did you enjoy business school? Like, did you enjoy the courses? Was that something that kind of you felt like was a good investment of time?
No. Nope. I don't know if I should say that, but no, I didn't. But I think what you said there is two different questions. So the first is, did I enjoy the course and the course content? On the whole, no, not particularly.
Yeah.
I didn't find it very applicable. It was kind of, I mean, this is, I suppose, my fault for picking a bad course, but it was sort of setting you up to be like a consultant or something like that, not at a big company or going into big companies and like fixing their systems stuff. I don't know. It was, the kind of management stuff and all this kind of thing was just not, it didn't feel applicable at all to what I wanted to be doing. Mm-hmm. However, was it a good use of time? Yes, I think it definitely was. Because what was nice, and I didn't go to a particularly great business school, and so I didn't actually find it very difficult, really. I didn't end up doing amazingly well, but I got through it without having to spend an inordinate amount of time actually studying. And so the kind of freedom that gave me and that's when we built Litmus, it was the second year of college. The freedom to do that and to do freelance web design work as well. I was doing tons and tons, just spending way, way more time on either client work or building Litmus than I ever did on university studies. So although I didn't particularly like it, and I don't have any particular, I don't look back and love my college or want to donate loads of money or anything like that, but I do think it was a really important time to just to have had that freedom where, my housing costs were paid for, or as part of the loans and everything, like I had money to live and buy food, and all that stuff was kind of taken care of. And so there was really no risk to kind of start a business at that point.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate to be in that position.
Well, this is interesting. Because I went to business school as well, and I would actually echo your experience. I think business education in general is actually in trouble, just universally. I think especially in our space, people that want to start small businesses, that want to build their own products. I think that business education for people that want to, at the higher levels, that want to go in and be CEOs and things like that are. I don't have any experience with that. But one thing that is interesting, that you felt like going to school kind of gave you that freedom to pursue this other stuff. And now that I think back to my experience, I went through my first year of college, and then I realized, I'm basically like, my cost of living is very low. And so I ended up quitting my part-time job, and that's when I launched my first company. Was my second year of college. And because,
there you go, yeah.
Because your cost of living is so low, you do start to feel like, I have a lot of freedom here. And I wonder, because I think about that question all the time. If when you talk to young people that might be interested in building products or starting their own business, if they should go to school, what do you think you would say in retrospect?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I would say that it's, well, certainly not a requirement, but it did give me, that kind of freedom and space to, with, as you say, with very little risk, to try things out, which I otherwise wouldn't have had the time to do. I think it's a little bit different in terms of the advice I would give. Like if you're talking about like a private college in America, probably 5 to 10 times more expensive than my British college costs.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think you need to kind of factor that into, these days at least. And college costs have gone up in Britain as well recently. So, I mean, that's a factor, I suppose. I mean, honestly, also, I did not go to a great school. So maybe that experience would have been different at, if I went to a better business school.
Well,
maybe.
let me kind of round off this part just by asking you, if some eager 18 or 19-year-old approached you and said, Paul, I have a choice. I can either go to college right now, or I can try to find a company that will take me under their wing and let me intern there. Is that something you think you would do as an entrepreneur? Let a young person come and intern and kind of learn like with hands-on experience? I think, certainly it would be. Yeah, definitely. Because that might be something that, maybe that is an alternative, is if you've got, 4 years of your life and, some money saved up, you could try to find some great companies that might be able to teach you something. Yeah,
no, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I think, it depends where you're based as well, doesn't it? It feels like having moved, so I now live in Boston in America, and here there seems to be a lot more support for those kinds of things. Like that here would feel like quite a realistic option.
Yeah.
Where I grew up, that would be quite hard to find, a company that would be kind of willing to do something like that. I think would have been tougher to find. Whereas here, I think that'd be an easier option to do, and a great one to do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about the genesis behind Litmus. How did it start? How did this happen? You were in college. What's the story?
Yeah. So I was doing freelance web design, and I suppose there's an interesting aside there, is that I was doing freelance web design for years and years and years. I mean, you remember I mentioned, building that custom CMS and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Had been doing that for years and was doing okay, and was gradually putting up my day rate over the years. But actually, where I found by far the most success was when I tried to kind of package up and, I guess, productize that web design process. So and at the time it seemed like a huge leap of faith, and looking back it's really insignificant maybe, but I stopped advertising myself as a web designer and said that all I do is blog design. And this was kind of at the height, I suppose, of people using blogging for business, and that being kind of the new thing to do. And so I had a fixed price for that, which I did increase. I think it may have started out at $1,000, or $990 or whatever. And for that, I would build you like a completely custom blog. And that like really took off just in terms of freelance work. That made a huge difference, because there's web designers, I guess, in general, are 10 a penny. It's very hard to discern the difference between people, especially in the kind of middle of the market. And so I was getting, a reasonable amount of work, but it was just on kind of a referral basis, and it was okay. But the projects were sort of all over the place, all different types of stuff. And I did really enjoy the blog design work that I had done as part of that. So that idea of just completely changing the website, all the pitch for myself and my work to be just fixed price blog design was much more successful. Anyway, so
just how much was the fixed price? So what was the product?
Yeah, so I believe it started out at $990 for for a blog design, and there were certain kind of restrictions on that, like 2 or 3 sections and this many revisions or something like that. And then, and I'm pretty sure it went up a bit after that.
Interesting.
Maybe up to as high as like 2,000 or 2,500 by the end. Once I had a few more examples to show and that kind of thing.
Huh. Yeah. So now you're doing this. You're doing kind of this blog design idea,
yeah.
and how does Litmus come out of that?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that I had to do before delivering the blog design templates and stuff to the client was to make sure that they worked across different browsers. And again, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have run into that issue and the frustration there, cross-browser testing. And at the time, there were relatively few tools out there that helped to automate that process or make that easier. So there was a tool out there, and Justin, maybe you're familiar with this. It was called Browser Cam.
Yeah.
Come across that?
Yeah.
And it was all right. It was decent enough, but it looked terrible. Right? It worked fairly well, but it looked awful.
Yeah.
And it was relatively expensive. I guess it's like $50 a month or something like that. And really, I just thought as I was using it, because I was a customer of theirs for a brief time, I think I could do a better job than this. I think we could build something better. And I suppose it was mainly that design aspect. Maybe that sounds kind of shallow, but as a web designer caring deeply about the design of these sites that I was working on, then having to use this tool that's just looked terrible in order to test those just seemed really frustrating. So the idea of building something really beautiful. This is also around the time of 37 Signals, having Basecamp, and using that myself to manage the client projects and being so impressed with the design and the usability and the cleanliness of that interface. So very much inspired by that and thinking, wow, what if you could build a browser testing tool that had the kind of design sensibility of something that was built by 37 Signals. And so I built it. I built the first version of it in a weekend. The first prototype, I suppose I should say. At the time, it had a different name. It was called Site Vista.
Okay.
One word, which I don't think is a particularly good name. But, obviously, why we changed it later on. But Site Vista was the first product. It was sitevista.com, and had this prototype up. Realized that it was very much kind of hacked together. And it was running on a couple of old desktop machines that I had running. This was at college, so I'm running it off the university network, which was incredibly fast and totally free. So hosting it on there, and that was the very first version. Quickly, it became clear that kind of getting it to run smoothly, like server-wise and that kind of thing, I was a bit out of my depth. But I had a good friend, David, who was actually also at college, but doing his year in industry as an IT administrator at this travel company. And so I said, Dave, could you help me, figure out how to, host this properly and, get all these virtual machines that we were using for the different browsers and stuff, get all that stuff scaled up a bit and running better and what have you. And he said yes. And I said, oh, well, I want to charge people for this, and here's, X% of the company in order to, get all this stuff working for me.
Yeah.
And so that was the first kind of co-founder. The very, very earliest stage was Dave. And so we launched this is still called Site Vista at the time, and we launched at a conference in Copenhagen, which sadly is no longer running anymore. It's called Reboot. And basically, I just printed off a whole stack of cards that gave you some kind of, it was like a trial and then a discounted monthly subscription after that, and just went around the conference, talking to all these web people and pitching them the product and handing out these cards like crazy. And that was kind of how we launched. Was that combined with pushing it out to the people who were on these listserv, like web designers, especially in the UK, who I would talk to online on these mailing lists and getting their feedback and getting them to trial it and sign up. And so that was the very first version, and that's how we kind of initially got started.
So tell me about that launch. What happened after the conference? You handed out a bunch of business cards at the Reboot conference. You connected with people over listservs. What happened? What happened after you launched? How many people signed up?
Yes, that's a good question. Well, it was very, very exciting. Of course, people could take a trial first, so they didn't have to pay right away. But I mean, we probably saw probably like 100 people in that kind of region in that first month or so, either that we met at the conference or that had got access to it online. And it was incredibly exciting to see them actually using the product. And I suppose in a funny way, because there were these computers that ran under my desk, even a couple of months in. Yeah. You would actually see, when I say you see people using the product, you literally saw them using it, because the websites they were testing would pop up on the screen of like the little, Bondi blue iMac that I had under the desk, and these couple of old PCs, if you had the monitors hooked up, you would actually see the web pages loading, being screenshotted, and then sent off to them. So actually see all the sites people were testing.
That's awesome. I'm smiling right now. I'm just imagining that. Like, you're a college student and you've got these people signed up, and then you can actually see them using it. That must have been so fun.
Yeah, that was great. It did cause some problems, because my girlfriend at the time would stay in my room, mm-hmm. and all these machines would be under the desk. And she was a much lighter sleeper than I was, and she would get woken up because the iMac and all these machines, like when they were used for testing in the middle of the night, like the fan would come on, and the screen would light up, and it was a very, very small room. It's just like a little studio, and she didn't like the fact that I was running all this under the desk, because she would get woken up if people were, in a different part of the world were doing the test overnight.
Oh man, I love that story. Yeah. So there were some trade-offs here. You were bootstrapping this, but this is in your college dorm, and it's affecting things.
Yeah. Yeah, relationship-wise, yeah. But it was it was fun, and that feeling of the first people converting from that trial to actually paying, and they got a deal, so it was really cheap at this point. It was $19 a month originally, mm-hmm. And and actually beginning to pay was just kind of amazing. Really, 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 really exciting to see. Mm-hmm. And I suppose so. What happened next is we're still doing freelance work at this point, alongside Site Vista, and we keep that up for a while. I'm just going to make sure I get everything in the right order here. But it became apparent that so Dave's doing kind of the server kind of administration, like infrastructure stuff, mm-hmm. And trying to keep things running smoothly in that sense. I'm still doing the actual programming of the app. We did it in VB script, and I think and MySQL and stuff. But it was a bit patchy.
Wow, yeah.
To say the best. And and I had another friend, Matt, who I mentioned earlier, who I'd worked with on the Simple Image Editor, and some freelance work in between. And he was the guy who was taking computer science, and so knew this stuff just way better than me. And so it was around this time that Matt came on board as a co-founder, to basically to write something that was a bit more solid than I had done. And so that's what he did. So we ended up throwing out, basically everything that I'd built in those early days, and building something much more solid and quicker and more reliable and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And we moved the hosting away from being under my desk and into data centers and stuff.
And when you, at the point where you threw everything away, how many users did you have at that point?
That's a really good question. I don't know off the top of my head. It would have been under 100, definitely. Okay. So when I mentioned 100 before, that was around the number that we managed to get signed up just to test out on that trial basis. Of course, not all of those converted to actual paying customers. So we would have definitely still been, say, under 100 paying customers at this point when we rebuilt things. And then, of course, we redesigned the site at the same time. We rebranded it as Litmus instead of as Site Vista. And it looks, I mean, the logo and everything is the same as it is today. I mean, the site's changed a fair bit, but there are still parts of that application today, and this is 5 or 6 years later, that are still left over from that version that we rebuilt, the three of us. Yeah.
Wow.
And sorry, just I think an important thing to mention too was that I mentioned that we got started doing cross-browser testing. But when you asked me to describe Litmus at the start of the call, I said we're a company, building tools for email marketers.
That's right.
So it was at this point as well that we introduced email testing as well as browser testing. And so the email testing piece was built entirely by Matt. And that was a big kind of turning point for us, I suppose, is the expansion from having just one tool to basically having two. And honestly, vastly underestimating the complexity of running an email testing service.
Yeah.
Because there's so many more moving parts than there are doing browser testing. But that's kind of an important thing to note, I suppose, is that the introduction of that, because that's now become our core product, whereas we started out, on the browser side.
That's right. And how did you guys know that was something that people needed?
Yeah, good question. I mean, certainly. We had done a little bit of email stuff ourselves, so we kind of knew that HTML email was sort of a pain. But it was largely through people asking us and telling us that, hey, you know what, we, browser testing is hard, but email testing is even more difficult. It would be great if you guys could do something similar for email. And I suppose after we'd heard that like a dozen times and had some limited experience of that ourselves, we thought, hey, well, actually, Matt was very, very gung-ho about it, thinking that it would be, pretty much as easy to build that as it would be the browser testing part. And as I say, it turned out to be quite a bit more difficult, but but certainly very much worth it. And further down the line, we still do web page testing, but it's very much a secondary thing these days, and honestly sold alongside the email testing in terms of test your emails with us and then test the landing pages that you're linking to from those emails across different browsers as well, as opposed to trying to... there's honestly these days there's much better standalone browser testing tools. Things like Browser Stack are great, and they have a stronger product than ours because we really haven't put a lot of time into... like interactive testing for web pages or anything like that, and so we kind of keep that as a tool, but it's very much secondary to the email piece.
And a big thanks to Paul for joining us on Product People. Paul will be back next week for part 2, where you can hear specific tactics on how to build a bootstrapped SaaS company. Now it's time for the shout-outs. This is a chance for you to advertise your project to our audience of product people, entrepreneurs, developers, and designers. First, I'd like to give a shout out to Kyle Fox, who's written a great blog post called Multitasking is the Heart of Product Management. Go to kylefox.ca to see that. Second, I'd like to promote our Product People newsletter. You can sign up and get product-making resources sent directly to your inbox. Go to productpeople.tv/newsletter. Next up, the fine people at Hover are giving all of our listeners 10% off every order. Go to hover.com/productpeople or use the promo code productpeople, all lowercase, all one word. Want to be featured in the shoutouts section? The cost starts at $39 per episode, and it's a great way to reach thousands of people. To purchase a shoutout, go to productpeople.tv/shoutout. We'll see all of you next week. In the meantime, follow us on Twitter at MIJustin, that's me, at Kyle Fox, that's Kyle, at Product People TV, that's the show. Podcast hosting is provided by Transistor.fm. They host our MP3 files, generate our RSS feed, provide us with analytics, and help us distribute the show to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. If you want to start your own podcast or you want to switch to Transistor, go to transistor.fm/Justin and get 15% off your first year.